"Who said you could be here?" The words landed flat in the marble anteroom, loud enough to turn heads. Colonel Desmond Hale stood over the woman by the wall, a delegation manifest folded in one hand, a ring of aides arranged behind him like a wake. He let the question hang a moment, enjoying the small theater of it. Then he said it again, slower in case she was slow. "Who said you could be here?" She looked up once. She said nothing. The summit had been assembling since before dawn. Flags of the Alliance hung in a row down the long glass wall, 29 of them, still in the windless air, each one a nation with soldiers somewhere in the cold. Beyond the turnstiles, the plenary chamber waited, empty chairs set in a horseshoe, microphones dark, nameplates squared to the millimeter. In the anteroom, the air smelled of floor wax and cooling coffee, and the particular ozone of too many secure radios breathing in one room. 0840 hours. The principals were due at 10. She sat with her back square to the wall, hands loose on her knees, a plain gray suit, and a lanyard that read, in small block letters, "Delegation Staff." No name. No rank. A watch worn with the face turned inward toward the wrist, the way a person wears it when they don't want the glass catching light at the wrong moment. Hale read the lanyard the way a man reads a parking ticket. Staff. No name he knew. He had built the floor manifest himself, 42 lines, every one of them a person he had chosen to admit, and she was not on it. And that settled the matter for him, the way most things settled for him. Quickly, and in his own favor. "You're an interpreter," he decided, "or somebody's driver got turned around. Either way, this is the principal floor. Wait outside with the cars." She stood when he said to. Not before, not after. One motion, clean, no push off the wall, no wasted weight in it. She crossed to the place his finger pointed and stopped there, exactly. And the aides who had been ready to enjoy something felt the small letdown of a target that would not flinch. Contempt needs a reaction to feed on. She gave it nothing to eat. At the turnstile, Command Sergeant Major Emmett Roan watched her cross. He had been running security details for 31 years, and he had learned a hard truth in the first 10. The body tells the truth the mouth has been trained to hide. He watched how her eyes found the exits before the chairs. He watched the inward watch. He watched her cover 8 meters of open marble without once glancing down at her own feet, the way people do only when they have spent years knowing exactly where their feet are. Nothing about her matched the word on the lanyard. He said nothing. He filed it, the way he filed everything worth keeping, against the day it would matter. "You heard the colonel, ma'am." First Lieutenant Casey Ford, 25, delegation protocol aide, said it with the small pleasure of a young man standing close to power for the first time. "Principal floor, you can't be here." "Understood," she said. One word. She gave it to him with a look he would spend the rest of the morning trying not to think about, and would remember for the rest of his life. She sat where she was told, still as stone, and a colonel who did not know her name walked back into the center of a room he was certain he owned, while the one man at the door who might have known better kept his silence and his phone in his pocket, and waited to see what the morning would make of them all. The technical session snagged 20 minutes later, and the room learned the first thing it didn't want to know about her. The multinational video link would not hold. The plenary feed was meant to bridge 9 capitals at once, real time, and every 90 seconds it dropped, and every drop sent a fresh spasm through the anteroom. A staff officer sweated over a laptop. 2 warrant officers argued frequencies in the low, fast voices of men who suspect they are wrong. Aides talked over aides. The principals were an hour out, and the Alliance could not make a screen stay lit. Ford, wanting to help, read a frequency aloud off a laminated card. He read it with confidence. He read it wrong, and the confidence made it worse, because 2 people started chasing his mistake. From the wall, without standing, the woman said 2 words. Timing offset. The room did not hear her. The warrant officer nearest her did. He looked over. She held up 2 fingers, then 4, a spacing in the air, and said, "Not the frequency. The sync." He hesitated. He tried it anyway. He keyed the offset she had drawn, and the link came up green and stayed green. 90 seconds, 3 minutes. 5, steady as a held breath. Everyone else in that room had explained the fault in paragraphs. She had used 4 words and a gesture. Competence has an accent, and Emmett Roan had just heard hers, clean and unmistakable, and then watched the colonel of the delegation call it luck, because Hale took it to the room. "There we go," he announced, to no one and everyone. "Sometimes you just have to let people focus." He did not look at the wall. He never once looked at the wall. It is a particular talent, to stand 3 meters from the answer to your whole morning and refuse on principle to see it. Roan looked at nothing else. He drifted over with 2 paper cups, set one near her without asking, and crouched to her level with the ease of a man who had learned 1,000 rooms by kneeling in them. "That was a clean call," he said quietly. "Sync offset. Most folks chase the frequency for an hour and blame the satellite." "It's always the sync," she said. "You've run comms downrange." "Some." He nodded slowly. He did not ask the next question because he already knew the shape of the answer, and asking it out loud in that room would have been like turning a card face up at a table full of players who had not yet noticed the game had started. He stood, knees cracking, and carried his own cup back to the door. And for the first time in 31 years, Emmett Roan felt the specific vertigo of realizing that the most dangerous person in a building was the one every man in it had decided to ignore. He had spent his career learning to read the small, unteachable things, the way a person set a cup down without looking, trusting the table to be where they had already logged it, the way she had chosen the seat with a wall behind it and 2 exits in her arc of vision, in a room she had been told she wasn't important enough to occupy. The economy of it. Nothing she did was for show, and everything she did was correct. And in Roan's experience, that particular combination came from exactly one place, and it was not a spa. He drank his cooling coffee and watched the colonel take a second bow he had not earned, and he thought quietly that some men spend their whole lives standing on trapdoors and calling it a stage. The link held for the rest of the hour. No one thanked her. She had not asked to be thanked. She had asked for nothing at all since 0840, which was itself the thing Roan could not stop noticing, that in a room full of people performing their own importance, the one person who performed nothing was the one the walls seemed to bend toward. By 9, Colonel Hale had turned dismissal into sport. It started as a line to the aides, tossed off the way cruelty is always tossed off, as a joke that costs the speaker nothing and buys him a laugh he mistakes for loyalty. "Send the spa guest for more chairs," he said, tipping his head at the wall. "She looks lost anyway." The aides laughed. Ford laughed a half-beat too long, the way a man laughs when he is auditioning for a part he has not been offered. The nickname stuck the way bad nicknames stick, because it gave a group of nervous people something small to feel superior to on a morning when everything above them was too large. The spa guest. She was moved off the wall to make room for a coffee cart. She was moved again, behind a marble pillar, because the good sightlines were reserved for principals. She was told, twice, that the front seats were not for staff, as if she had asked. Each time she went where she was sent. Exactly where. She did not drift a foot wide or a foot short of the mark, and each time she noted the move against the watch, turned inward on her wrist, timing the pattern of her own humiliation the way a person times a sentry's rounds. 9:04, 9:11, 9:19. She was building something out of their contempt, brick by patient brick, and not one of them could see the frame going up around them. A foreign delegation's aide, a young woman with a tricolor pin at her collar, saw her shuffled behind the pillar and quietly turned her own chair around. "Please," the aide said, in careful English. "Sit. There's no reason for you to stand." "I'm fine," she said. One word past necessary, and warm in a way none of the Americans had earned that morning. Roan saw it. He saw who in that room spent kindness and who only spent contempt, and he understood that the ledger was being kept by someone other than him. The aide lingered a moment, uncertain, then leaned in and said, "Lo, my grandfather always said the quiet ones at the edge of the room are the ones who held the line." She smiled, embarrassed by her own sincerity, and went back to her delegation. The woman by the pillar watched her go, and something moved behind the stillness and was gone before anyone but Roan could have caught it. Then she was stone again, back to her count, back to her clock. 9:26, the principal's in 34 minutes. Twice more they moved her, once for a camera crew laying cable, once because a staffer decided the pillar itself should be clear for a backdrop. Each time she rose on the word and settled on the mark, and each time the small crowd of aides felt a little less clever about it, though none of them could have said why. It is an unsettling thing, over a long enough morning, to keep pushing on something that doesn't push back and doesn't fall. The mind starts to suspect it is not a wall at all, but a door, and that on the other side of it is something it doesn't want to meet. The patient ones are not slow. They are simply certain. They have stood in worse rooms than this one, held worse ground than a marble corner under a stranger's scorn, and they have learned the oldest lesson the wrong people never learn, that stillness is not surrender, it is a decision. And the men who mistake the one for the other always find out, eventually, and always too late. If you have ever been the quiet one in the room, written off before you opened your mouth, tell us in the comments what that felt like. Every single one gets read. And if you want to see what happens when the wrong man finally learns exactly who he's been standing over all morning, subscribe to Honor Tales and stay to the end, because it is coming, and it doesn't come quietly. They had given her a nickname and a corner. She had given them nothing but the exact truth of where she stood, which was the one thing in that whole marble room that none of them could read. At 9:30, Hale stopped mocking her and started erasing her. It was quieter work, and it felt to him more responsible, more like the kind of thing a chief of staff was for. He went to the turnstile himself and had her lanyard flagged. "Credentialing error," he told the tech. "Pull her floor access until we get it sorted." The scanner learned her badge and learned to reject it. On paper, and at the gate, she was now not cleared for the floor she had been invited onto, and the record would show it had been a simple administrative fault. Nothing personal, nothing a man would ever have to answer for. Then he went into the delegation office and did the thing that would end him. On the working table sat a bound assessment, 60 pages, gray cover, an interoperability and readiness review that had been couriered in under seal for the session. Hale knew that document better than he knew his own efficiency report. He had spent 8 months hoping it would die in a drawer, because its findings cut straight through a procurement program he had spent his last 3 years championing, a program with his name in the margins and his next star stapled to its success. The review said the program did not perform the way the briefings promised. The review had numbers, and the numbers did not care whose name was in the margins. He lifted it off the table and set it aside from the brief packet, face down, the way you set aside a thing you fully intend to lose. "Tighten the seating chart," he told Ford. "Principals and named staff only. We're over capacity." Ford, obedient, ran the list. A name came off. It came off so easily, one keystroke, that neither of them felt it go. The the way you never feel the exact moment a rope begins to fray. Hale believed, that morning, that he was being careful. That was the part he would never be able to explain later, to the investigators, or to himself. That it had not felt like sabotage from the inside. It had felt like housekeeping. A cluttered floor tidied, a loose document secured. An unaccounted-for woman moved to where unaccounted-for people belonged. He had spent so many years arranging rooms to flatter the man at the center of them that he had lost the ability to tell the difference between order and control. And control had become, for him, a kind of weather he could no longer feel himself making. He straightened the brief packet twice. He squared the nameplates in the chamber himself, running a thumb down the row to true them. He checked his reflection in the dark glass of a powered-down monitor and adjusted the ribbon rack a millimeter. Every small, correct thing a careful officer does, he did. And beneath all of it, face down on a side table, 60 gray pages sat waiting to end him, and he walked past them 4 times without a flicker, because a man rarely fears the weapon he has already decided is his. Across the anteroom, she watched the turnstile reject a runner's badge with the same small red chirp, and understood from the shape of the error exactly what had been done to hers. She crossed the floor to Roan. She said 2 words. "Manifest's wrong." Not a complaint, a diagnosis. She named the mechanism and left the rest to him, the way she had named the sink offset, and turned and walked back to her pillar, without waiting to see what he would do with it. Roan stood very still. Then he did the first thing that morning he was not supposed to do. He pulled the master invitation list, the real one, the sealed one, the document from which the delegation chief of staff was supposed to draw his working manifest, on his own device, and he read it line by line. Near the bottom, under a need-to-know handling caveat that Hale's working copy had never displayed, and Hale had never been cleared to see, he found a single entry. He read it once. He read it again. He went pale to the lips, and the paper cup in his hand crushed a little without his noticing. The colonel had spent the entire morning editing a door. He had not once suspected he was standing inside the frame of it. Her name was struck from the chart. Her badge was dead at the gate. The assessment lay face down on a table where it was meant to die, and the only man in the building who had read the real list stood at the turnstile holding a phone. He was suddenly, deeply afraid to put down. Roan found her at the anteroom's edge, near the glass, where the flags hung closest, and the morning light came through cold and clean. He kept his voice under the noise of the room. "Ma'am, your badge scans as staff. The invitation list says something else entirely. I can fix the gate right now, quietly, and no one will know it was ever wrong. Or I can leave it exactly the way the colonel said it." He paused and chose the last words carefully. "Your call. Not mine." She looked at the flags, not at him. "Leave it." 2 words, and folded inside them a whole instruction. He understood that he was being allowed to watch, that whatever had been assembling all morning, she wanted it to finish assembling itself, in the open, in front of the people who most needed to see it. He came to a kind of attention that had nothing to do with his spine, and everything to do with the 31 years behind it. He went looking for Ford next, and found him by the coffee urns in the service corridor. "That assessment the colonel pulled off the table," Roan said. "Whose name is on the front of it?" I didn't look," Ford said. "He just said pull it from the packet. Look, before you sign anything else this morning, before you strike one more name off one more list." Roan let it sit. "You're 25, Lieutenant. You've got 40 years of career in front of you. Don't spend the first hour of it standing on the wrong side of a door you cannot even see." Then Roan did the last unauthorized thing. He reached his own security superior, off the record, on a handset in a cold concrete stairwell where no one would overhear. "Sir, I need you to trust me for 60 seconds. The staffer the colonel has been running out of the anteroom all morning. If she is who the sealed list says she is, we need to stand down and get out of her way. Quietly. Right now. Before this gets away from us." The voice on the other end was silent a long moment. Then low. "Hold. Say nothing to anyone. Wait for the principals." She checked the watch turned inward on her wrist. 9:51. The principals at 10. She had been counting down since 0840, since the first flat question, since the first time a man decided her silence was a floor he could stand on. She had counted every move they made her make, and every minute between them. She was not waiting to be rescued. She had never in her life waited to be rescued. She was waiting for a clock to finish running. Here is what none of them knew, and what you are about to. The woman by the wall had done exactly this before, stood quiet in a place with no flags, and no cameras, and no generals, and let arrogant men finish building the case against themselves, stone by stone, until it fell on them. If you want to understand how a person learns that kind of patience, and what it cost her to learn it, stay right here and subscribe to Honor Tales, because the next part is the one that explains everything that comes after. A sergeant major had just warned his own chain of command to get out of a woman's way, and the woman had told him, in a single word, to let the colonel keep digging. To understand her, you have to leave the marble room. You have to go back 13 years to a night with no flags at all. She sat alone now in a summit ready room off the corridor, the door shut, the roar of the assembling alliance reduced to a hum through the wall. From an inner pocket she took a challenge coin, worn smooth at the edges, the enamel half rubbed away by 13 years of a thumb finding it in the dark. She turned it once in her fingers, and the years fell away like water off steel. Her name is Vivian Marsh, Lieutenant General, 3 stars, United States Army. Commander of a multinational special operations headquarters that appears on no tour map and in no press release. Call sign, since a night in 2006 that she has never described to anyone. Lodestar, the fixed star you steer by when every other light has gone out. The blank suit and the empty lanyard are not a disguise so much as the residue of a life spent being the one thing in the room that no one is supposed to notice, and that she had learned, long ago, to prefer. 2013. She was 37 then, a lieutenant colonel, and a multinational reconnaissance company had been cut off after the line collapsed in the dark. Soldiers from half a dozen allied nations, a young captain among them serving under a brigade commander named Anders Lindqvist. Heyer hesitated. The map was ugly. The weather was worse, a freezing rain coming sideways off the high ground. Someone with stars on his collar was still deciding whether the 41 lives on the far side of 800 meters of open ground were worth the ones it would cost to reach them. She did not hesitate. She took the quick reaction force, and she went. There are decisions that live in a person forever, and most of them are made in seconds, in the space between one breath and the next. She remembers the cold coming up off the ground like standing water. She remembers holding the corridor open for 11 minutes. 11. She has counted them 10,000 times since. While frightened men she had never met ran through it toward the sound of her voice on the radio, that voice flat and certain and stripped of everything but the way home. Left 40. 200 meters to the wall. Keep moving. I have you. I have you. She remembers the radio discipline of frightened men learning, in real time, to trust a stranger's voice more than their own panic. She remembers a young soldier who could not have been 20 freezing behind a low wall, and the way she talked him up off it. Not with comfort. Comfort gets men killed, but with a task. Count your magazines. Good. Now your buddies. Now move. She remembers that the cold had a sound, a high, thin ring in the ears that she has never heard since, without her heart changing its pace. and she remembers the exact weight of the decision she made at the 200-meter mark when the corridor started to close, and there was time to pull everyone back clean, or time to hold it open 90 seconds longer and reach the last 4. But not both. She held it open. She has never once wondered whether she was right. She has only ever counted the cost. She has never told a living soul what it costs to be the one who decides who goes into the fire. It costs the fire a name. That night, the name was Bo Iverson. Master Sergeant Bo Iverson, who had pressed the coin into her palm a year before and told her to keep it somewhere she could reach it when it got dark. Who put his own body between the extraction and the guns so that the last 4 men could reach the corridor. He shielded them across the final open stretch, counting them through, and he did not come back across it himself. She brought home 41 souls that night, from 6 nations, under fire, in the freezing rain. She has counted every single night since, the one she did not bring home, and the 41 wore the crests of the very nations now seated 2 floors above her. The Alliance breathing in that chamber was breathing, in part, because of a night Vivian Marsh had never once talked about. While 2 floors up, a colonel chasing a star struck her name off a seating chart in front of the men she had carried out of the dark. She closed her hand around the coin until the edges bit. 1040. She stood. One motion. Clean. And she walked back toward the marble room and the clock that was almost finished running. 10:52, and Colonel Hale wanted the anteroom clean. The flag officers were minutes out now, and his anteroom, still had the spa guest standing behind her pillar like a stain he had failed to scrub before company arrived. It offended him in a way he could not have put into words, that she had not left, that she had not begged, that she had absorbed an entire morning of him and given back nothing he could use, no anger, no tears, no leverage. A man like Hale reads that kind of stillness as insolence because he has no other file to put it in. Escort her out, he told the detail. Now, I want this floor clean before the generals walk in. Roan did not move. Hale turned, slow. Sergeant Major, I gave an order. Roan met his eyes, and still did not move, and something in that refusal should have warned a wiser man that the ground had shifted under him in the night. Hale, unwise to the last, decided to make the point with his own 2 hands. He crossed to the pillar, took her by the upper arm and pulled. Let's go. Out. With the drivers, where I put you the first time. She led him. She did not pull away. She did not set her feet, or turn her shoulder, or do any of the small automatic things a body does when a stranger seizes it. She let his hand close on her arm, and she stood at the exact center of her own calm, and she timed it, the way she had timed every move all morning, one more entry against the watch turned inward on her wrist. And then, for the first time since 0840, she smiled at him. Small. Certain. The smile of someone watching the last piece slide home into a frame she had been building since the first flat question. He thought the smile was surrender. It was a door, swinging open. Ford had been sent to help walk her out. He got one look at Roan's face, gray, rigid, the face of a man watching a bridge take its first shudder, and he stopped cold 2 steps short. His hand, half raised toward her other arm, fell before it landed. Whatever the morning had built in him, some cheap eagerness to be near power, came apart in that single instant, and something better stood up in its place. He stepped back. He would not touch her. It was the first fully correct decision of his career, and he made it with his whole chest. At the far end of the anteroom, the tall corridor doors began to open. The principal's detail, early. The first of the multinational flag officers stepping through into the cold light off the glass wall, folios under their arms, a low murmur of 9 languages. Hale, his hand still locked on a 3-star general's arm, his back squarely to the door, did not see them. The whole room did. Lieutenant General Anders Lindqvist came through the doors 3 paces and stopped as though he had walked into glass. He was 57, silver at the temples, a coalition commander who had buried enough of his own soldiers to recognize, instantly and across a crowded room, exactly what he was looking at. He saw her face over the colonel's shoulder, the face he had never actually seen, only heard, a voice on a radio on the worst night of his command. At the far end of a corridor she had held open with nothing but that voice, while his reconnaissance company ran for their lives, his own captain among them. Alive, married now, with children, because of her. Lindqvist straightened, and in the middle of a diplomatic anteroom, with no one having called the room to anything, he rose to full attention, heels together, chin level, shoulders squared, the way a soldier comes to attention only for the thing he holds most sacred. "Lodestar," he said. One word carried the entire length of the chamber. Recognition moved through the room the way fire moves through dry grass, faster than thought, faster than protocol. A German general set down his folio and stood. A Norwegian rose beside him without a word. A Canadian. Then the rest. The flag officers of the nations whose sons and daughters she had carried out of the dark, and the nations who had only heard the story and knew what it meant, coming to their feet one after another. No order given, no order needed, until the entire assembled command of the Alliance was standing in silence. There is a particular sound a room full of soldiers makes when it rises without being told to. The scrape of chairs, the settle of boots, the small collective exhale, and then a silence heavier than any order could command. Not one of those generals stood for a rank. Ranks fill that chamber every year. Ranks do not make a 4-star straighten his spine like a lieutenant. They stood for a debt. Some of them had known the story from the inside. Some had only heard it told in the low voice reserved for true things. And Lindqvist had lived it, on the receiving end of a voice on a radio, and had waited 13 years to find the face that went with it. Now he had, across a marble room, with a colonel's hand still on her arm, and he would not sit down until the wrong had been made right in front of every witness the Alliance could muster. And Colonel Desmond Hale still had his hand clamped on her arm. His face began to cycle. First confusion, a frown, a glance around, the reflexive irritation of a man certain the room has simply made an error it will shortly correct. Then disbelief, as the standing did not stop, as it spread outward instead of settling. Then the first cold crawl of recognition up the back of his neck. The arithmetic he had refused all morning, finally running itself without his permission. Then horror, complete and airless, as he understood that every general in NATO was on their feet for the woman he had called a spa guest, whose arm he was, at that exact and unforgivable moment, still gripping in his fist. General Malcolm Thorne entered last. 59, 4 stars, Supreme Allied Commander, a man who read a room the way other men read a clock face. He took in the standing chamber. He took in the hand on the general's arm. When his voice came, it was not loud. A voice like that never has to be. "Colonel, take your hand off Lieutenant General Marsh." And at the turnstile, for the record, in the flat and level cadence of a man who had waited 31 years to say one true thing at exactly the right moment, Command Sergeant Major Emmett Rohn said it aloud, for the log, for the room, for the Alliance. Lieutenant General Vivian Marsh, Commander. Hale let go as though the arm beneath his hand had turned to open flame. The unraveling came in the same breath as the release. Thorne did not pause to savor it. The Alliance does not savor a hidden door. It finds it, and it closes it. The interoperability assessment, he said. It was couriered under seal for this session. I want it read into the record. Colonel, produce it. Hale's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The document lay face down on a table in the delegation office, 2 doors away, exactly where he had left it to quietly die. Ford stepped forward. In his hands, the gray-covered assessment, and beneath it, printed clean, the credential flag order with Hale's name on the authorization line. "Sir," Ford said, and his young voice shook once and then held level. "The colonel pulled this from the packet at 9:30 this morning, and he flagged the general's badge at the gate at 9:32. I have the access log. It's all time-stamped." The chart with her name struck off. The badge, dead at the turnstile. The buried review. The doctored working manifest that had never shown the need-to-know line the sealed master list carried. Laid end to end, in a standing room full of the most experienced officers in the Alliance, it made one clean and undeniable shape, and every general present could read it at a glance. A room full of generals was standing at attention for the woman a colonel had called a spa guest, and the colonel was about to be walked out through the one door he had spent the entire morning guarding. It cascaded the way these things always cascade once the first stone finally goes. Fast and downhill, and without mercy for the man who had so carefully set them. The assessment was read into the session before noon. The procurement program Hale had spent 3 years shielding, the one whose documented failures his silence had been protecting, the one with his name in the margins, was flagged for independent review that same afternoon, and the numbers Marsh's team had gathered proved exactly as ugly as he had feared, which was the entire reason he had tried to bury them under a stranger's humiliation. The doctored floor manifest, and the credential flag order, and the struck name became the spine of an investigation that would outlast the summit by more than a year. Thorne relieved him where he stood, without ceremony. 2 members of the detail walked Colonel Desmond Hale out through the turnstile his own order had turned into a weapon, and the scanner, still set exactly the way he had set it, chirped its small red refusal at his badge as he passed through it. One last time, for him. By the time the doors closed behind Hale, the shape of the thing was already public and already moving. A program that had survived 3 budget cycles on the strength of one man's confident silence would not survive the afternoon once the silence was gone. The review named specific failures, interoperability gaps, that would have cost lives in exactly the kind of night Marsh had lived through 13 years before, and now those pages would be read aloud into a record that 9 nations kept. That was the true weight of what Hale had tried to bury behind a nickname. Not his career, though he had lost that in 90 seconds, but the soldiers the program's failures would have found in the dark if a woman he had called a spa guest had not carried the truth into the room in a plain gray suit and refused to be moved out of it. Thorne turned to the room. Who preserved the assessment? A silence. Then Ford, quietly from the edge of it, before he could talk himself out of it. "I did, sir. I pulled it back out of the office. I should have done it an hour earlier than I did." Marsh looked at him then for the first time as at a soldier, rather than as at a symptom. She crossed the floor to him. She said one line, low, meant for him and not for the room. "You stopped when it counted, Lieutenant. That is the whole of the job. Not never being wrong, but stopping when it counts. Now go and be the officer that version of you would have followed." Casey Ford would make a quiet, stubborn career of trying to deserve that one sentence. Years later, a major with gray coming into his own temples, he would tell a room of lieutenants the story of the morning he almost put his hand on a 3-star general, and how a sergeant major's face and one word from a woman who had every right to destroy him and chose not to had turned his whole life a few degrees toward true. He would not tell them the colonel's name. He would always tell them hers. For his part, Emmett Roan retired that autumn with 31 years and a single regret he never spoke aloud, that he had waited for the principals, as he was told, instead of fixing the gate at 9:30 and sparing her 3 more hours of a small man's contempt. He said as much to her, once, quietly, at the door. She told him he had done exactly right, that the gate was never the point, that the point was the room seeing what it had almost done and learning from it. "You gave them the mirror, Sergeant Major," she said. "That's worth more than the door." He carried that the way he carried everything worth keeping. If this is the part where your chest went tight, the part where the room finally stands, where the quiet one is finally fully seen, then do one thing for us before the story closes. Drop a comment with the exact moment that got you, and subscribe to Honor Tales, so the next soldier's story finds its way to you too. Every single comment on this channel gets read. Every one. The chamber emptied by degrees. The generals went back to their flags and their agendas and their nations, folding the morning into the long institutional memory of the Alliance, where it would be told and retold for years in the low voices soldiers save for the stories that are true. The noise receded down the corridor and left the glass wall quiet, and the flags still, and the cold light unchanged. Vivian Marsh stayed. In the corridor beyond the anteroom hung a wall of unit crests, the coalition formations that had bled together across 2 hard decades, enamel and brass, each small shield, a fellowship of the living and the dead. She walked its length slowly, unhurried, a woman with nowhere left to be moved to. She stopped at one crest near the end of the row. She had known exactly where it hung before she ever entered the building. She had, in a sense, come for it. She stopped once on the way, at a crest she did not touch, only looked at, a formation she had served with in a country she would not name, men and women, half of whom were gone. The wall held more of her life than any personnel file ever would. She had spent a career being unwritten from records on purpose, her name lifted out of after-action reports for reasons of security, her medals awarded in rooms with no windows, her rank a thing spoken aloud in only a handful of places on Earth. A colonel striking her from a seating chart that morning had, without knowing it, only done to her in miniature what her whole profession had done to her by design. The difference was that the profession had asked her permission, and she had given it, 41 lives at a time. She rested 2 fingers against the metal, the crest Bo Iverson had worn, the stillness that had carried her through the entire morning, the stillness a colonel had mistaken for weakness, and an alliance had risen to its feet to honor, settled over her now as the thing it had always been. Not the absence of feeling, the mastery of it. She held the fire. She had held it for 13 years, every night, one name at a time, and she would hold it for 13,000 more. Her phone lit against her palm, a single line, arriving on a channel that should have been dark, from a call sign that had been carried on the rolls as lost for 2 years. No greeting a stranger could have parsed, nothing a machine could have flagged, only an image and a place and a word that only she in all the world would answer. A frozen harbor, one light burning at the end of a long stone pier, and beneath it the 2 words, the High North, and beneath that the coded greeting they had sworn to each other never to send unless it was real, and never a drill. Signed Kestrel. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she closed her hand around the phone the way she had closed it around the coin and turned back down the corridor toward the flags, unhurried, certain, already somewhere none of the men in that building could follow. The generals had returned to their nations. The colonel had gone to his investigation, and the woman by the wall walked out into the cold light with a worn coin, a name she would never stop counting, and a message from the far north that told her, in a language of one, that the next mission had already begun. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.